After a lot of balance patches and a lot of metas, most of the tanks in Overwatch right now are actually really good. The majority of them are decent enough to be played in GM1, even Wrecking Ball and Zarya. You just have to know what you're doing, of course. But with almost every tank being viable, that means it's time to go over how to counter every tank. We'll go over the best hero matchups and the best playstyles to take advantage of every tank's weaknesses, so let's get started right away with D.Va. D.Va's got that super high mobility and a lot of health and armor that allows her to be pretty versatile and difficult to punish. The best way to counter D.Va isn't necessarily to play beam heroes like Zarya and Symmetra. They play in more closer ranges that D.Va should be able to escape easily unless she's used her boosters to engage in the first place. D.Va is hardest to deal with when she has high grounds to drop off of and a safe line of sight to her supports, so the best way to counter her is to soft dive them. That's engaging the enemy backline while still having an easy means of escape. D.Va's also great at peeling. You don't want to full commit onto the enemy backline while the D.Va's away. She can easily respawn and really quickly too, so you want to be careful. But just applying pressure on the enemy backline like slamming them with Doomfist or poking them from the flank with Echo without pushing all the way will force the enemy D.Va back from her aggressive position, giving your team a lot of space to work with. The big weakness that D.Va has is that she can't only play defensively on her backline. It's not enough range for her to apply damage and fight duels to keep her team safe, but she also can't sit too far from them or that soft engage can turn into a hard engage where her supports get blown up while she's too far ahead. Forcing her to switch between the distances by pushing the heroes supporting her is key, so heroes like Doomfist and Tracer are great for poking and prodding the enemy backline. Doom's punch and slam both can't be blocked by defense matrix, and even though D.Va has a decent matchup into Tracer, Tracer can pick and choose her battles, which D.Va really can't. And on the defensive side, if a D.Va is tearing up your backline, Brigitte is definitely the pick. Brig's whip shot cannot be blocked by D.Va at all, so as long as you make sure to hit it, it's super hard for the enemy D.Va to even get on your supports in the first place. Use the link in the description below to get access to a GameLeap membership where you'll find guides for all roles, including the heroes that haven't been in the spotlight for the past couple seasons. There are loads of courses and guides to help you master your favorite heroes. It's always nice to get better at the heroes that are actually fun for you to play, so use that link to get access to all those guides and get better. And fittingly, next up is Doomfist. His fast mobility also allows him to dodge his counters and play hard to get, and his block makes it seem pretty useless to focus him, since it always gets redirected into his next punch. Firstly, let me keep it simple. For supports, you've gotta pick Ana, just because she has the only stun on the support line. Just having the sleep available for Doom, whether it's during his block or not, is perfect for throwing a wrench in his setup. That's the type of style to go for to stop Doomfist. When Doom does engage hard and slam everybody, it's really hard to stop him, so it's best to prevent it from happening in the first place. Doomfist may be a smaller tank in size compared to Winston, but he is just as easy to force out before he goes in. Shooting the enemy tank isn't a fancy strategy, but shooting the enemy tank to stop them from diving, now that's a real plan. It works really well against Doomfist, and one of the best DPS to do so is Echo. Even with her sticky bombs being largely ineffective against Doom's block, they do force the ability, and she also just can't die to Doom during regular gameplay anyway. But the real clutch is having the aerial mobility to scout him every fight, and poke, poke, poke. This can sometimes work even better against Doomfist than it does against Winston, because it's much easier for Winston to build ult for his team. For Doomfist, not so much. Taking damage is ideally avoided. And of course, if you really want to get cheesy, you can just lock Sombra. You don't even need to hack him all the time, but a hack into Virus is great. And if you're looking to counter the dive even more on the tankier side, Orisa is always great for body blocking him and stunning him with your javelin when he tries to press your team. She may not be as oppressive as before, but man, is she still great at countering Doom. Now moving on to Junker Queen. She may have a lot of strong abilities, but you can shut most of them down with one simple status effect: a slow. And the more slows the better. Ramattra and Mate together can turn Queen from a corner-dominating titan into a slug-like training bot. Not only does slowing her down give you a chance to burn her with intense focus fire, but it also shuts down her carnage completely. If she's slowed by anything, anybody can dodge it just by walking backwards. You're not always going to find the kill by running and gunning right for her at the start of every fight, but it will definitely push her far, far away from her effective range. Playing Brig also works into Queen, but I have to warn you, it's definitely a lot harder than playing into D.Va. Your whip shot can boop Carnage, and your shield can block the ultimate, but both Carnage slashes and melees will go through the shield, so you need to stay far away from Queen, but still close enough to police her movements. So yeah, like I said, it's definitely a lot harder than playing into D.Va. Next is Mauga. He may be less of a threat after the nerfs, but his kit is still pretty well rounded even with lower damage output. The best way to handle Mauga isn't to focus all your damage into his massive hitbox, but to play heroes with smaller hitboxes. Sounds pretty smart. Especially now that his weapon damage has been decreased and he needs more shots to ignite targets, it's harder to get picks. There's more time to react to being shot and to promptly escape his line of sight. But both chain guns at the same time are still amazing for melting close-range targets, so the solution is the same for every role. You'll want the small hitbox and mobility. Sounds like Tracer, but the first hero that comes to mind is really Junker Queen. Compared to other tanks, you have to get way closer to her to be able to deal your full 216 damage per second, and even with that damage it can take up to 3 whole seconds of fully accurate tracking to get the kill. And if she's got commanding shout to escape close range even faster, you can see how it's a tough matchup. For supports, Kiriko is almost impossible to target. Not only is she one of the skinniest heroes in the game, but Protective Suzu also resets all the progress Mauga makes towards his kills. And here's what not to do. Don't play Bastion or Torbjorn in an attempt to deal more damage to Mauga. Your own hitboxes are already big enough for him to deal double chain gun damage much easier. I've seen too many players switch to Bastion after playing against Mauga, and it really makes no sense. But moving on to Orisa. She's one of the major countering heroes in the game. Most of her kit is just about shutting down other strong abilities. The best way to deal with her is kind of just to ignore her. There are just not a lot of comps that can kill Orisa decisively, but there's a difference between shooting Orisa when she's far from cover and 3-1 pushing her with all the abilities your team can muster. She's got a big hitbox, especially for her head, so heroes like Sojourn and Hanzo can really catch her off guard with well-placed headshots. Even though you can't one-shot tanks, you can definitely dome them in the head for almost half their health when they're trying to push forward. It's still really effective. As for countering Orisa with another tank, the only one who can really put a dent into her armor is Mauga. Even with his guns toned down, he's still got great tank busting, and it's really effective against Orisa. But she does have a javelin spin to escape a close range rush. So once again, it's really about pressuring her when you can, but still focusing on the rest of her team. All you have to do to get started is to rotate around the Orisa instead of through her. She's strong, but her value is really limited to where she currently is, and moving someplace else either takes a long time or needs the use of her javelin spin. And finally, if you're looking for a good support pick, Lifeweaver has a great time into Orisa despite not actually attacking her in any way. Catching Lifeweaver as Orisa is really difficult, but honestly, catching Lifeweaver with any hero that doesn't have vertical mobility is difficult. But his pedal platform also doubles to counter Terra Surge. He doesn't really get to counter a lot of heroes, so good for him that he's got Orisa shut down. Ramattra is next, and even though his Omnic form has gotten a lot stronger, there's always an easy way to counter his Nemesis form, burst damage. Ramattra can really go crazy against teams that don't have high enough damage output, but the high damage output you need isn't to kill the Ram, it's to stop him from pushing. Sojourn is a great example. You can deal maximum damage to his Nemesis form thanks to the enormous hitbox, and you can build a lot of railgun charge off of his block. But instead of shooting the Ram with the railguns you build, you'll be aiming at the rest of his team. But the idea behind stopping the enemy Ram is to deal so much damage to him that he simply cannot throw punches out. A Ram spending his entire Nemesis form blocking is definitely good for your team, even if he's on the objective. And if there's one hero that Zenyatta can actually counter, it's definitely Ram. He's one of the best tanks right now that still struggles into the new Discord. Dealing with Ram as another tank is pretty simple too. Either you avoid him just like you do against Orisa, or you play someone who has both the damage to pressure him and a stun to keep him away. Both the just mentioned Orisa and Sigma are two top options for that. Sigma may struggle into Nemesis form, but it is really easy to hit your accretion onto it, so it's definitely not a one-sided matchup. Right after Ram, we have Rein. Luckily, it's a lot easier to deal with Reinhardt. You just need to be able to break his shield, and one of the best options is Bastion. Bastion is actually kind of the one hero that's stopping Reinhardt from being good right now. Ramattra and Sigma are both better options for being able to survive his turret form and even kill him during it, but they're not necessarily the best tank choices into him. That spot goes to Orisa and surprisingly Wrecking Ball. They were good into Rein in Overwatch 1 and they're still good now, even though Ball is pretty weak. Two things are really important to play tank into Reinhardt: a way to dodge or block Earth Shatter and enough damage to kill him eventually. Eventually, he's doing a lot of heavy lifting, since Wrecking Ball's 125 DPS won't be helping you break any shields, but it is enough damage in the late fight after already rolling through his whole team and shooting his supports. Unfortunately for him, speaking of supports, a lot of them are really good into Reinhardt. The only one who really doesn't do enough either for their team or themselves is Moira, and it's not like she's supposed to do something. Putting a Discord on him, outmaneuvering him with mobility, booping him away, they all help a lot. So as a support, you're pretty much covered. Roadhog is next. Play Ana. 100%. If you're a support and you see that big hog, the next move has to be to get one of you onto Ana. Roadhog's pretty simple. Anytime he pushes and tries to look for a hook, it's a high priority to just shoot the guy. You don't always need a stun, but it can definitely help. Both Orisa and Sigma have ways to protect their team and stun the hog, and it's pretty much personal choice whichever one you pick. Just remember that Orisa is a lot worse than before into Roadhog. Make sure you're not wasting your javelin spin when his ultimate is available, or you'll find out exactly what I mean for yourself. If you're trying to pick the right DPS into Roadhog though, it's best to settle on someone who can just deal a ton of damage. Even if you're just shooting Roadhog the whole game, it's honestly not that bad, since you're preventing a tank from walking forward while building your ultimate. At least Sojourn can build Rail Charge and Tracer can build Pulse Bombs, even if you're not using them on the hog. Next up is the most recent king of the meta, Sigma. He's still good, but even in his own comp, there was a constant counter, Mei. She's already clearly a great choice thanks to her slow, but both her Ice Wall and Ice Block are great for catching Sigma and surviving his Flux respectively. She's definitely the top choice, but even Echo is a good option. If the enemy Sigma doesn't respect your focusing beam, you can pretty consistently get the pick on him if he misplaces his shield or lets it break. As for the supports, no one really has an interactive matchup with the hero who can block almost all the abilities in the game. But I will say that Lucio is pretty important for helping the rest of your squad to get on top of the Sigma and overwhelm him, and booping him into your own team doesn't hurt either. And for tanks, you can go for two options. One, the classic strategy. Ignore the overpowered tank and focus everyone else. Or two, run straight at him and blow him up fast. The first strategy is for dive heroes. Winston and Doomfist are both really excellent for this. And the second one is for rushing, like with Rein or Ram. Both strategies are really good, but you might want to pick them depending on the map. Using Rein or Ram to attack a Sigma defending the high ground of Dorado's second can be pretty difficult. And now for the final three, starting with Winston. It's tough news to break, but unfortunately, yes, Winston is also completely shut down by Bastion. Even Reaper can be maneuvered around, but Bastion just has the perfect matchup. Beating Winston is the same as beating Reinhardt. You just have to break the bubble and then break the Winston himself. But to avoid repeating the same old counters for Winston like Brig and Torbjorn, a new one has actually finally emerged. Mauga might be the best hero into Winston, maybe even better than Bastion. The only moment during the game where Winston has a chance of killing Mauga, like ever in the game, is when he's reloading. At any other time, you can easily deal crits to his massive hitbox, giving you 72 overhealth per second if you hit every shot. And if you know your numbers, you'll know that that's more than Winston's 60 DPS. So even if you somehow find Mauga without abilities and without ammo, he also has to be without healers too. It's really rough, especially when the strategy of ignoring the tank and going for their backline doesn't actually work against Mauga. He can just run back and buff his team like Junker Queen on steroids. Winston play will definitely be rare as long as Mauga stays like this, but if he does get on your backline as a support, make sure that you have some sort of boop to give your team some breathing room. Letting him place a bubble perfectly on your backline is very close to worst case scenario. Wrecking Ball is next, and he also happens to be pretty bad against Mauga. Everything I just said about Winston basically applies to Ball too. But luckily for Ball, he doesn't have to commit as hard as Winston does to be effective, so he's not as tough to play into Mauga. Although unluckily for Ball, he is really tough to play into Junker Queen. Whenever you try to engage, boom, hit by a knife. Entire backline buffed by commanding Shout. And good luck trying to force the Shout beforehand when she deals more damage to you in the duel. Bastion is similar, although it's much easier to force his turret form than Queen's Shout. And it's a pretty common theme against dive tanks, but any form of knockback is amazing for deflecting an engage that your team would otherwise not be ready for, so Lucio and Brig are definitely solid options. Finally, the last hero on the list, Zarya. Just like Ball, she's not doing too hot, but she at least has her bubbles that keeps anti-heals and slows at bay. Just like some of the other tanks, you can also deal with her in two ways. Either you break her bubbles and run her over, or, the million-dollar answer, you can ignore her. It is surprisingly good, and against more tanks than you would think. Winston is great for ignoring her and going for the rest of her team, while Ramattra or even Orisa are ideal for running her down. The most important thing is really to just commit to one plan though. Not being sure of what you're doing is going to end up with the enemy Zarya getting a lot of energy without taking a lot of damage. Lifeweaver is also still a good pocket pick. He can counter surges of all kinds, be it Terra or Graviton. Zarya also happens to not have enough vertical mobility to chase after the pedal platform, so it's rare that Zarya can ever actually pressure the backline. Lucio is also really nice, especially if the enemy Zarya has one too. You can just match the speed of the enemy engage and then boop her if she gets too close. Sound Barrier is also one of the classic counters to grab. But don't go play Lucio and Lifeweaver at the same time. Without good burst healing, your tank can get forced backwards even by a low energy Zarya. And to finish it off with a couple good DPS picks, Echo, Sojourn, and Soldier are all the best suited to stay out of her range while still being able to commit enough damage to go for the kill if needed. And that's how to counter every tank in the game. I hope you enjoyed and learned something new, even if it was about how counterable your favorite tank is. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.